to parent our children wisely in this really complicated world. So I'll be sharing you things that I have learned so far. Some of these things I wish I'd known when my children were young. My fourth grandchild was born less than 2 weeks ago. And so I've been helping my daughter.
Something for so
Uh,
discipling your child with love.
so
Karen Halford.
Helene, can you mute yourself? Thank you. Or someone can mute Helene for her. So I'm going to be talking about loving limits, disciplining your child with love, because the most important thing in discipline is love. And God disciplines us with love so that we can discipline our children with love. And the more I've learned about God's love, the more I've actually learned how to parent with love myself. And what are the goals of Christian parenting? Now, I think in the past, you might think, well, we produce children who are Christian, who do what we do. But actually, we're here to raise children who have an active experience of what God's love is and what God's forgiveness is. And because they're key to his character and our salvation. And we help raise children with those ideas when we show them love and forgiveness in the way that we parent too. We want to also raise children who are happy, kind, and loving, which means that we need to model that in our interactions with them and our parenting with them. And it's quite good for us as parents, I think, and grandparents in my case, to reflect on
Recording in progress.
Love and his patient discipline in your life. How has God parented you? How has he been gentle with you through your ups and downs, patient with you through your learning, forgiving of your mistakes, doing things for you that were beyond your wildest expectations, things that you thought you didn't deserve, but God does it for you because he loves you so much. What can we learn from the gentle, accepting, and kind way that Jesus related to people who were struggling around him? People who were living in ways that they knew weren't right. And he comes in very accepting, very gentle. He doesn't yell at them and shout at them and discipline them. He just very gently accepts them right where they are and loves them. And in that acceptance and love, they feel empowered, they feel free, they feel safe to choose a different way of being because he has helped to calm the trauma and fears in their mind, the distress that makes it much harder for them to behave well. And I'll explain how that works in the brain. So how can Jesus be our example of a parent in the way that he relates to others, rather than thinking, well, my model for parenting needs to be my parents, my grandparents? We actually need to make sure that every generation is learning and parenting better than the one before. My parents were intentional about parenting us in loving ways that show God's love, and I tried to pass that on to my children and added more that I had learnt. My daughter's doing that for her children and adding more that she has learnt, and I'm learning from her. And that's how it should be, that every generation says, God, how do we do this better? And we learn from God and also from good research that is backing up so many things about healthy discipline and character development. So how God parents us, well, we can find that in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8. And I'm not going to read it now because we've lost some time at the beginning. And you'll all know these verses, I imagine, about patience. And it's really interesting that when Paul talks about love, he talks first of all about patience. And that's very interesting because I would have probably started with kind if it had been left up to me. But when I think about love as patient, I realize that it has to start there. Patience is pausing. It's not rushing in with what I want, what my perspective is. It's being patient, pausing. What is going on for the child? Let's think what's happening here. How do we show patience first and understanding of the child? Because once we understand what's happening in the child's experience in their life and their understanding, then we can go on to be even more kind because we have an understanding of what they need. What really delights me is that when we're parenting, we are co-parenting God's child with him. And that's wow. Like our child is his child and we are entrusted to parent his child well. And how do we parent God's child? How do we co-parent God's child with God? How does God want us to treat his children and also one another in that relationship? Because each one of us is a child of God. And how does he want us to be loved? There's some useful information about parenting styles. So there's structured parenting. That's you have guidelines and rules and routines that help to maintain the family. And there's unstructured, which is much more flexible, maybe chaotic. Things are more spontaneous. Then there's distant parenting, which is kind of keeping yourself emotionally separate from the child, aloof, not connecting with them so well, not being empathic and listening to them, how they like to be loved, etc. And there's warm and close, which is loving and caring. So what we find is that authoritarian parents, that you must do this because I say so, and they have structures, but the children don't feel so loved, the parent is distant, then those children experience anger and loneliness in that context. And we see that happen also as adults. If you put them into a situation where there is structure and rules, but the person giving you the rules doesn't really care about you, like your boss at work, you're also going to feel angry and lonely. So this is normal for all of us. And then there's unstructured and distant. So the child doesn't really know what's going on. The parent isn't particularly connected with them. And those children feel sad and lonely. They're kind of emotionally neglected and they're not given direction as to how to behave. So they're very confused and they feel sad and lonely. Then we have permissive parent, which is warm and close and loving, but kind of lets the child do what they want, or even gives the child kind of a high position in the house. So what do you want to do today? What do you want to eat? What do you want to wear? And they put a lot of choices onto the child, which are sometimes more than they can really manage. It's best to limit children's choices so they don't feel confused and overwhelmed and too responsible when they're just children. So families that are unstructured and warm and close, that are permissive, the children feel loved, but they feel very confused. They're not sure what the boundaries are. They're not sure what the expectations are. And so that's a bit difficult for them. And then we have authoritative parents. And this is the way that God parents us. He gives us structure, he gives us rules and guidelines, but he is warm and close. He is with us all the time. We don't have to pray for him to be with us. He's there. We need to show up and remember that he is there and be with him rather than saying, please God, be with me. He's there and we have to be aware of his presence. So when we have a relationship with someone who really cares about us and has our best interest at heart and is giving us some guidelines to help us, then we feel safe, loved, and happiest. And that's the relationship God wants to have with us and that he would like to us to have with our children, because those are the children that actually flourish and do better in life. I love what Ellen White says here, how to win love and confidence. And she says in Child Guidance, if they would gather the children close to them and show that they love them and would show an interest in all their efforts, even in their sports, sometimes even being a child among them, they would make the children very happy and they would gain their love and win their confidence. And the children would more quickly learn to respect and love the authority of their parents and teachers. And this is a really key principle that Ellen White is sharing here. But when our children feel really loved by us, then it's so much easier for them to behave well, to show respect, and to kind of stay within the guidelines that we give them. They're more likely to flourish, to feel safe and confident, and know what is the good thing to do. And they have the emotional bandwidth to manage that. So God gently leads parents. And when I had young children, this verse was so often a comfort to me when I had so much to do. And I was actually seriously ill while I had 3 small children. So parenting was quite a challenge in those years. And in Isaiah, it says, he will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms and carry them in his bosom and gently lead those who are with young. And I love that because it told me that God wasn't expecting me to do lots of great other things in the world. My responsibility was to be with those who were young, those who were my children, He was also gathering them in his arms and carrying them and gently leading me through the process. And that was such a beautiful picture of love and concern and support from God to me and to all of us as parents. Kindness is key, says Ellen White too. Let parents be sparing of censure. Let kindness be the law of the home and school. Let children be taught to keep the law of the Lord, and let a firm, loving influence restrain them from evil. So she's also saying what they need is this firm, loving influence is that authoritarian parenting, where there are clear guidelines that children know and just a few so they can remember them, and they're in a context of love, which helps them to manage their behavior better. Fathers and mothers, you are to represent God's disposition. You are to require obedience, not with a storm of words, but in a kind and loving manner. You are to be so full of compassion that your children will be drawn to you. The law of God in the home life and in the government of nations flows from a heart of infinite love. And these are such beautiful words to inspire us to look to God, have our hearts filled up with his love, so that we can then represent God's character to our children. And it's not a dictating, ruling, harsh, shouting way. It's a kind, compassionate way that draws people to him. Jesus came to represent his Father God, and he was filled with compassion. So often it says he was filled with compassion and he did this and this. And we often gloss over that compassion part, but everything Jesus did started in a heart of compassion to the people around him. Now, this is something that I've drawn out in a simple way of how our brains work. So something happens, and in our relationships, we don't feel cared for. This is going to happen to anyone, anytime, adults, children, anyone. If we're not feeling that people care for us, if we somehow don't feel God cares for us, then we feel stressed. We're designed to feel to want connection, loving connection with others. And when that doesn't happen, when we don't feel cared for by others, then stress gets released into our system, cortisol and adrenaline. And when that's in our brain, it's really, really hard for us to listen, show empathy, and be compassionate. So it's really important to understand this. If a child is stressed, if you are stressed, then we can't show empathy and be compassionate. We can't listen well. And it's particularly important to realize that in children who will often struggle to hear and listen more than we think because of the way their brain is working as a young child. But if we are harsh with them, it's going to make it so much harder for them to listen to us and to show kindness to others and to be obedient. So when that happens, when the stress gets released into our brain is all about protecting us, and we're much more likely to hurt others by our words and actions in defense. So we go into fight or flight mode or freeze mode or something, and we're much more prone to say something we would regret later, be harsh, whatever. And when we do that, when we shout or yell or hurt someone by what we say or do, then they become stressed, and the stress hormones in their brain will make it harder for them to listen and show empathy and be compassionate to us. And then we have not a great cycle going on there, because then they may not show care for us, and then our stress gets released even more, and we have a cycle of adding stress to each other. And we often see this, it often happens in parenting too, that suddenly you'll get into a distress cycle, either yourself or your child will. And it's important to recognize, hey, I can feel the stress. I can feel it's hard for me to care. I'm feeling more grumpy and irritable or shouty, and realize you're in this cycle, and stop. If you can, stop, breathe, calm down, pray. It can take quite a while. Once stress hormones are triggered in the brain, it can take quite a while for them to calm down again in you or your child. So be aware of that and particularly help them to calm down, but you will need to calm down too to help them really well. But there's also a compassion cycle. So when we feel really cared for by God or by others, then we have other hormones that get released, oxytocin, dopamine, etc., which means that we are then better able to listen to show empathy, to be compassionate. And it also helps children to make wise choices about their behavior, manage their behavior better. The more love they feel, the easier it is for them to keep the rules, think about what they're doing, behave well. So we help them behave well by helping them to feel loved, because then their brain is more in a state where they can do this. So when we care for others, when we feel cared for, then those good hormones are in our brain, which help us to be more caring. And when we care for others, then those hormones get released in their brain, and they're better able to care and make good decisions, listen well to us, etc. So this is a good cycle to be in when we're parenting. And it can start by helping us each time we need it every day to sit in God's love for us, to experience it for ourselves. No matter what we're going through, God loves us. He just thinks thoughts of loving kindness towards us. And when we sit in that space of love and feel his hug, and even can hug ourselves sometimes to experience God's love for us, then that can help us enter this compassion cycle. So the happy principle is we don't help children to behave better by making them feel worse. The happier and more loved they feel, the happier and more loving they will behave, and the more obedient they will be, because it's easier for them to manage their behavior when they're feeling loved and happy. And when they're distressed, they can't listen to us well. They're so overwhelmed by their feelings, they can't make good choices. So remember this: you never help a child to behave better by making them feel worse. So if you're doing something that is making your child feel worse when you're disciplining, you're often not helping them to behave better. So the more caring connections we make with our children, the easier it is for them to behave well. So each time we show them love and care, we strengthen their relationship with us. We give them a clearer picture of a loving God, and the easier it is for them to behave well. So what does love look like? Love is not just me saying, I love you. Yes, that's helpful, but love acts. Love does these things. Love comforts the child when it's distressed. And God talks about being the source of all comfort for us so we can comfort others. Love is accepting the other person. Can you all check that you're muted, because I can hear someone talking and singing? Please, Conchita, can you mute them? You should be able to as a host. So it's also about accepting children when they've messed up.
Yeah.
Jesus accepted others.
No, I'm watching something, sorry.
Someone called Chad. Please, mute yourself.
Live.
Now, someone has muted Karen.
I've got it now, I think. Can you hear me? Yes.
We can.
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Okay, lovely. So when we accept our children when they made a big mess, and we just give them a loving hug and let them know we care for them, we do what Jesus did when he met the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery, Zacchaeus. And our loving acceptance can actually encourage children to make a better choice next time. Come here. Yes, you messed up. I still love you. Let's fix it together. We can do this. Affection is hugs and lovely words. Appreciation is thanking our children. The more we thank them, the happier they are, and the easier it is for them to obey us, and they're less likely to have a conflict with us if they're teenagers or something. So appreciation is really important. A lot of children's behavior is because they haven't got our full attention when they need it. And when they don't have it, it's actually quite distressing for them. Obviously, we can't give them attention all the time. But when they don't get enough attention, then they will behave in ways to try and get attention, because they need to know they matter to us. So show them that they matter to you, that you want to listen to their stories, that you care about them. Show them respect. If you want them to respect others, we also need to talk respectfully to them as Jesus would talk to them as children, and bless them. To encourage them with their challenges, be there to support them, teach them skills so they can do the things we ask them to do. I'll talk a bit about that later. Help them to feel safe, because when they feel safe, then it's much easier for them to behave well too. Let them know that they are precious to you and that you're there to help them through their challenges no matter what. On the other side of love is lonely and disconnected. And these are the things that cause distress in children, put them into the distress cycle, make it much harder for them to manage their behavior. So hurting them, judging them, rejecting them, even time out can be experienced as a powerful rejection. Abusing them in any way, hurting them, making them feel afraid, criticizing them, ignoring them, shaming them, discouraging them, putting them down, abandoning them, or threatening to abandon them. All of those things severely, severely distress children and make it very, very much harder for them to behave well. So it's better to do the things on the love side and help to shape their behavior in love as God helps us, because he wouldn't do anything on this other lonely, disconnected side. That's not how he treats us or how he would treat a child. And we want to show children God's character. And all of these things on the love connected side are what Paul says, do for one another, comfort one another, accept one another, show love to one another, etc. He says these things, and these are really useful, like 10 commandments of love that are hidden amongst his letters. So when babies' needs for these wonderful love things are not met, they experience neglect, pain and distress, sadness, aloneness and abuse. And when that happens, they start to think, I'm not important, what's wrong with me? Maybe if I try harder, they will love me. And that tends to lead to negative emotions. I'm not worthy, distress, bitter, hurt, sad, lonely, etc., which will all make it much, much harder for them to make good choices. And that leads to unhealthy behaviors, eventually addictions, manipulation, bullying, perfectionism, eating disorders. And their children who experience a lot of pain, distress, sadness, etc., are going to struggle in life long term with successful relationships, poor sense of self, low achievers, more likely to have mental illness and addiction. So we need to really be aware of these important things. And Adventists at Loma Linda have done some really strong research on what they call adverse childhood experiences, which are when children experience neglect, pain, distress, sadness, aloneness, abuse, etc. And they found the outcomes for those lives are seriously challenged. And when they wanted to see what would happen to children who experienced this in their older age, they followed them through the decades. There were hardly any children that had severe abusive experience as children who were still alive by the time they were 60 because of the health and other sorts of issues that were around that. So it's called adverse childhood experiences, and you can look into the research for that. But the wonderful thing is when babies experience the love that God intended them to experience, love, touch, time, attention, play, teaching, comfort, they have healthy thoughts. Wow, I am loved, I'm special to others, I can do it. And they have more positive emotions, and that will lead to healthy behaviors. So love leads to healthy thinking about oneself, positive emotions, healthier behaviors, and more positive lives and good outcomes. So loving connected relationships help children to develop love and empathy in their brains. The more love and empathy and care we give them as children, we help to shape their brains to love God and love others well. The challenge is that children who experience abuse and disconnection and a lot of fear, or even witness just aggression and violence in the first 3 years, when they look at their brains when they're 3 years old, and the brain kind of rewires to accommodate new learning, we see that the brain scans of many of the children who have experienced abuse and disconnection and non-loving relationships, the area of empathy in their brain is a black hole on the brain scan. So we need to be really aware of how we are helping children at this really crucial time of 0 to 3, to help their brains develop the skills of love and empathy. By our love and empathy for them helps them to develop a brain that is more open to loving God and loving others. So behavior is communication in children. And this is really important to understand. Often children are not intentionally being naughty and disobedient. As I mentioned before, if they're struggling with difficult emotions and distress, it's so hard for them to make good choices and behave well. The happier and more loved a child is, the happier and more loving is their behavior. But there's all sorts of reasons why a child might be finding it difficult to behave well and to follow your instructions and to be obedient. And sometimes their behavior that we might be surprised by or find behaviors that we weren't expecting or we're not delighted about, it might be saying they need something. They can be saying, I'm overwhelmed. And we forget that children are overwhelmed by major sensory experiences. When I was very ill, I found myself experiencing this as an adult. And I would go into Tesco's and I could hardly stay in there for more than 5 minutes because the sensory stimulation of being in Tesco's, the noise, the movement, the struggling to find things, people everywhere, all the distractions was so overwhelming that I couldn't actually manage to stay in the shop. And I understood why some children have tantrums in supermarkets. And it's not that they're necessarily being naughty or demanding. They are overwhelmed by the experience and they need to go out and find somewhere quieter. And more children are have more developed sensory systems that are more sensitive to the overwhelming information. And as an adult, and a well adult now, I can screen a lot of the extra sensory information when I go into Tesco's, but small children can't do that. And we need to be aware of that. And sometimes even when they're saying, I want in a tantrum, and I'll explain more about tantrums later, what they're really wanting is your attention. And when we're in a supermarket with a child in a trolley, they're near us, but we're not giving them much eye contact. We're looking for what we're buying and putting it in the trolley, and they're near us. But when they're near us and we are not looking into their faces well, they really struggle with that. Because it feels like we are neglecting their needs because we're right there, we're almost face to face, but we're looking everywhere else. And that's very confusing for very young children's brains. So sometimes our children are just confused. We take them places and we haven't explained where we're going. We just take them to a wedding or a church event or wherever, and we haven't explained what's going to happen there, what the expectations are, what's going on, how long we're going to stay. And they're just confused because you know all that, but they don't, and you haven't explained it to them. So it's really helpful to tell them what's going to happen, to be there to answer any of their questions about what's going on, because it's quite bewildering. If someone picked you up and put you in a social situation where you didn't know what was happening, you'd find that really disorientating. And as an adult, we have more stories and information that can help us manage that, but small children don't. So often when children are behaving in ways that we find surprising, they need to have something in their environment or in the relationship with you change. They're not comfortable. A baby that needs a nappy change is not comfortable, and it will say, change something, make me feel happier. I don't know what's wrong. I can't do anything about it as a baby. So you're the adult. You need to change something. Also, check your child's physical needs. I find when I see children who are struggling to manage their behavior, they're often hungry. And, in churches, when our services go on too long, and I'm being really honest here, many children at school, at nursery, playgroup, they will eat lunch at 12 o'clock. So their bodies are wired to eat lunch at 12 o'clock. Now, we can delay that, we can manage that and wait for another couple of hours, but a small child can't. They are seriously distressed when they get hungry, and it's much harder for them to manage their behavior. Maybe they're thirsty, maybe they're tired, maybe they're uncomfortable, particularly sitting in church. The seats aren't created for children and their legs are dangling, and it really hurts them not to wiggle and move around in small children, so they're not comfortable. Maybe they're not feeling well, maybe they need some comforting and soothing, maybe they're confused, afraid. So before we discipline, we must always ask ourselves, what's going on for the child? What's their experience? So that needs our compassion and our empathy and some awareness of, this child is not just to be shaped to come with me around my life. I have to make sure their needs are met first. Their stomachs are smaller, their bodies are smaller, their muscles and things ache when they're not well supported in a good chair that's designed for them. and just really understand what that's like. If you're not sure what that's like for a child to sit on a chair at church, sit on a table for an hour and see how that feels, because that's how it is for a child sitting on a chair. Supporting positive behavior, we also need to check, are their senses overloaded, as I mentioned before? Are they in a place with lots of noise, lots of action, lots of people coming and going and movement, lots of unfamiliar situations? That's really, really difficult for small children. So be aware in that place when their sensories are overloaded, they're more likely to become overwhelmed, to be in distress and go into the distress cycle. And you might not recognize that. And they're not being naughty. They're just so flooded with sensory information that you can't make sense of it anymore. There's just too much, and they just get overwhelmed, and they need a quiet space to calm down with you and your reassurance, your calm reassurance. Let's go somewhere. Let's find a quiet place to be. This is too much. This is too overwhelming. So let's find a quiet place so we can calm down for a bit and then make a choice what to do next. So there's different sorts of tantrums, and we can't call them all the same. So you need to understand a tantrum and understand that when a child loses control of their behavior, there are different reasons. One of them, as I mentioned, is sensory overload. And they just cannot think, focus, deal with a sensory stimulation, and they can get very distressed and just lose control of their emotions. They can be desperate for attention from a parent or adult. So as I said, even if they're demanding, I want this, underneath it, they can be saying, I want you. I want to know that you are there for me, that you're paying me attention, that I matter to you. Sometimes a tantrum is because they can't make themselves understood or express their needs. And they get so frustrated because they haven't got the words to describe how they're feeling. So the more feeling words we give them, the better. And say, oh, maybe you're feeling this, and give them the words to help them. Then they have words to use so they don't have to act it out in another way. Maybe they feel frustrated, afraid, overtired, have other powerful feelings. So when a child is having a tantrum, think, what might they be feeling now? What's going on that could be, is it frustration? If it's frustration, they need some support and help with whatever they're trying to do. Is it fear? They need you to help them feel safe and protect them. If they're fatigued, then obviously they need to have rest or time out. So think about what has triggered this behavior and think about what they most need to calm that down again. If they're actually trying to control you and get what they want, this is the time to not be compassionate. Deal with this in a different way. You need to be compassionate. But what my daughter says is, when you speak like that, I can't really understand you. So I will listen to you when you can talk to me in a calm and big boy, big girl voice. Then I will listen to what you need. And then they will tell her, they'll maybe calm down after a bit and get their breath and then say, actually, I would like to have this. And then she will explain, I'm really sad, but we can't have that right now. We don't have the money for this or the time for this. And I know that's really hard because you want it so much, and that's sad, and that's frustrating, and that's disappointing. So she's giving them the words, and she says, I will be here with you. I'm here with you to help you manage those big feelings because this is how you feel. So it's being compassionate towards their feelings, not telling them not to, but just say, I'm here to help you with those big feelings. You can't have what you want right now. We can't always have what we want. God doesn't let us get what we want all the time. But he's there present with us to help us grow through that. So that's a very short how to think about tantrums, but it can be really helpful. Now, when you want to make a request, when you want the child to do something, make sure you've got their attention and touch them gently. Tap them, get their attention so they're really looking into your face. The reason is if you just yell from one room to another to a child, do this, you have no idea what they're doing. Children get very engrossed in their play, in their Lego, and whatever they're doing. And if you just yell something from the other side of the house, even if you say their name, they may be oblivious to it. So if you want them to really respond to you well, go to them, get their attention, touch them gently, look into their face, and make eye contact and smile. Now, this is really important because when you do this, You're having that loving connection, that compassionate cycle is starting. You are with them, you're looking into their face, you're smiling, you're making eye contact. They feel loved. And then it's much easier for them to do whatever it is you want. If you shout at them from another part of the house or go over to them and shout to them close up, children find that very, very distressing. Shouting is really, really difficult for children to experience and very painful for their ears and painful for their heart. So tell them calmly and simply what you need them to do, and say one thing clearly at a time. Check that they've understood the request by repeating it back. So I've asked you to go and put your shoes on. What do you need to do now? And they will say, well, I need to go and find my shoes. Okay, yes, now let's go and find your shoes. So check that they understand. I had a really funny story about this because when Nathan, my middle child, was about 4, and my youngest one was just under 1, we had a freezer that was in the garage. So when I wanted to go and make lunch, I needed to pop out into the garage very quickly, pull something out the freezer, and then come back into the house. And I was literally gone like 2 minutes. And I said to Nathan, I'm going to go into the garage and get something out of the freezer and bring it back for lunch. I want you to watch your little brother. So I went out, pulled a couple of pizzas out of the freezer, went back into the living room. In 2 minutes, the baby had pulled over a large plant in the corner of the room. Yes, so what was I doing with a large plant in the corner of the room? That was probably not a great idea. But the baby had pulled the plant over. He'd pulled it out the plant pot. He dragged it across the living room, which had a pale carpet. And he was sitting in the middle of the living room, chewing my yucca plant, teething on it, like a beaver. So I took this scene in, and I thought, I wonder what just happened here. So rather than say, Nathan, what were you doing? You weren't looking after your brother. Why didn't you stop him? I thought, let's listen to the child. So I said, Nathan, what happened here? And so that's a good open question. Nathan, what happened here? It's not critical, it's just open. And he laughed and he said, Mummy, you told me to watch Joel. And I watched him and it was so funny. And then I realized that when I say watch your little brother, that means something entirely different. It's like he watches TV, so you don't have to do anything. You just sit there and watch. So it didn't mean to him, stop your little brother doing anything stupid. So I realized the fault was with me. I didn't check with Nathan what he understood by watch your little brother. And so next time the situation arose, I had to think, how do I say this differently so that Nathan understands that when I leave him alone with his little brother, he's there to help him, entertain him, to keep him where he is, to stop him doing things that are not so helpful and might actually hurt him. So it's important to check they really understand. Encourage them with our tone and smile and show confidence that they can do this. They will follow through. I'm going to be here with you. Let's go find your shoes. So often we just want them to go and do it on their own, and it's actually quite hard for them. We give them some challenging tasks for young children to do. And so we can support them, encourage them, remind them gently if they become distracted, and then thank them warmly when they complete the task. So this is a warm, caring way to encourage them to do something that you need, and make it as easy as possible for them to do the best thing. So it's our attitude, it's our interaction, it's our positive, caring, love, support that can help them to do this job well and support them through that. And when we encourage them with our tone, our smile, our love, our confidence, that gives them more encouragement and positive experience that will help them to do it well. And then thank them when they've done it, because that is really, really encouraging for them. Remember that they're still learning. And so small children in particular, can they do what I expect them to do? A small child will knock a glass of water onto the floor at the dinner table. And it's my job as a parent to make sure that I don't put glasses of water next to small children at the dinner table. And we need to understand what their bodies can do and can't do. And they're going to be more, they're not so much in control of their bodies as we are as adults. And we need to be sympathetic towards their, quotes, clumsiness. They're not aware of the consequences of pushing something onto the floor or not paying attention to things. They're busy doing what they're doing, and so they don't always see what's happening around them. And that's for us to be aware of. So am I punishing them for not being developed enough to do this task? Am I asking them to do something they really can't do? Because when children are afraid of punishment, they don't learn well and they don't behave well either. So we need to be aware of that. It's interesting because in the Jewish culture, my Jewish friend told me, we think that under 12s are still learning, and the responsibility is on parents to be better teachers. And if the child isn't learning the good behavior, that's because we need to change our approach to them. So they say that once they become 13 and they reach bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah, that's when they come, that means under the law. So under that age, they see them as learning, and we need to support their learning well. And I quite like that idea. So we really need to be aware of what children are capable of, and children are capable of different things at different times and stages because they're all different. Keep it simple. Children are easily overwhelmed. And if I was to parent again, I would keep my life much more simple, not so much rushing around trying to do lots of things. I would limit their choices. They would have less toys at one time. I would let them have 10 toys for a week, and then they can swap them for 10 other toys for the next week. Because I see that children that have too many toys around, they're in a whirlwind. They can't focus their attention on anything. They become almost ADHD. This hyperactive. They run here and they run there, and they pick up this bit of Lego, and then they play with that toy, and they can see this and that. And it's very much harder for them to really focus on one toy and play with it well and maximize the learning and attention from it. So if I was to do things again, I would let them have a choice of 10 toys for a week and then swap it around. It's easy for them to keep tidy. It's better for their play, better for their learning. And also, if we can keep our lives as simple as possible, then we lead by example, and we are calmer for having a more simple life. Today, our lives are crazy. There is so much happening. They're so busy. And our children are getting into a whirlwind with us. I was reading something about ADHD recently, and they were saying, actually, is this brain's adapting to our current world of too much information all the time? We were never intended to live like this, but because we do, our bodies and brains have had to become very flexible, distractible, doing many things at once, and not focusing as well. And that has a big implications when they are learning as well. Something we need to remember also is, how do we respond to children when they tell a difficult truth? Because if children tell a difficult truth about their behavior, they own up to something they've done wrong. We really need to, from very early on, have an attitude that we're gentle with them. Because if they have the courage to tell the truth and then we get mad at them, we teach them to lie. So we really need to be very positive about children telling us difficult truths, saying, I'm really pleased you're able to tell me the truth about that. That was very courageous. That was really excellent to tell the truth. Now let's go and fix the problem together. Let's see what we can do together to make things better. Because if we punish them harshly, we teach them to lie to prevent future punishment. And I've seen this so many times. So be aware of the implications of your response to their behaviors. The problem with physical punishment, like hitting, spanking, and doing things like this, is it basically creates fear. And in the Bible, we're told that perfect love casts out fear. And we're there to show children God's character. So fear and love, they're incompatible. And that's really difficult for children. When they love and fear the same person, that's very complex for them. And when we might hit a child to discipline them, we actually teach the child that it's okay to hit other people who don't do what they want them to do. And we realize now that it can set a pattern for future violence. I mean, I grew up in a time in England when children got the cane at school, and these things are all very normal. But now we understand more about the psychology, the long-term effect on children. We understand this is not helpful. The other problem is that physical punishment builds anger, resentment, and rebellion in a child's heart. It's that distant but authoritarian parent, that segment of the quadrant that I shared. So when we do these things, it can build anger and resentment in their heart. They may conform, but inside they're rebellious and angry. And it does not on its own teach a child positive behavior or self-control. The most challenging thing that I experience as a therapist with many Christians and Adventist families is that physical punishment distorts a child's picture of God as a punitive parent rather than a loving and forgiving father. They become afraid of God. And in some ways, when we do that, we have misrepresented God's character because he is perfect love and he doesn't create fear. He casts fear out. So that's the kind of parent he invites us to be, a parent that loves and keeps a child safe from fear. That's what love does. So how do we love in a different way? Shepherds actually, people talk about spare the rod and spoil the child, but shepherds do not use their rods to hit sheep. A shepherd told me if they ever hit a sheep, they would lose control over the flock because when they're afraid of being hit, then they'll run away from the shepherd and life will be very difficult. So the rod that the shepherds used was to hoik them out of ditches, to put along the side of a precipice to keep them safe, like a railing, to kind of turn the herd the flock in a certain direction away from a danger, and to use the rod to kill the bears and the snakes and other things lions that might come after them, like David did. The sheep must never be afraid that the shepherd will hurt them because then they would be out of control. So the shepherd's rod, if you look in Psalm 23 about the shepherd's rod, it guides, it comforts, it keeps them safe in a difficult and challenging place. It sets safe boundaries, prevents them from falling over the edge. So, it's in the valley of the shadow of death, your rod and staff, they comfort me, they keep me safe, they let me know that you are keeping me safe and I'm not falling over the edge and you will pull me out of the pit. So it's important to see these other pictures. And the other thing that I reflected on as a parent was that I cannot imagine that Jesus would hit my child. He gathered children on his lap, he blessed them, he told them stories, he showed them love. Just cannot imagine that he would ever hit a child. So what do we do? How do we help them choose good behavior? And we help them by creating clear boundaries. So we need to choose a boundary for our child, not too many at once, they can't deal with that, just 2 or 3 good boundaries relevant to the age of the child and their life. So we choose a boundary, we show what it looks like, we explain why it's important and check the child understands and recognizes the boundary. So for example, I would take my 2 sons, I do have a daughter as well, but just using the sons right now. And Nathan would go to football practice and we would take Joel to the park while Nathan did his football practice with his team. So we'd have to explain to him, see this line on the football pitch? This is a boundary. And this means that we don't cross that boundary. If we do that, if you cross that boundary, you'll get mixed up in the game, people will get hurt and annoyed, and it won't go well. So we need to stay well away from this boundary so we don't even get anywhere near in case anybody from the team accidentally comes over the boundary. So we show them the boundary. I would show Joel this boundary and say, this is the line, and this is why it's important. Now, tell me what this line is and why it's important. So I check his understanding. And he will say, well, it's like the edge of the game and we mustn't go near because it will spoil the game. Yes, that's right, Joel, well done. And then make it easy to stay within the boundary, which means stay away from the football game. So I would take a ball and say, hey, Joel, let's go right over here and play with our ball well away from the football, or let's go play on the swings or the slide. So we make it easy for them to do the right thing. We're going to go over here and have fun instead. So you don't need to go and play in the game. And then we enforce it warmly, gently, and consistency. And give them positive attention. Yes, Joel, that's right. We're staying on the right side. Good boy for staying away from the edge. And then Joel being Joel, he will get closer and closer to that white line because he wants to know, is mommy serious about the white line? Does it really matter? And so he might look at me and have a bit of a grin and kick the ball nearer the line and have another look. And I will say, Joel, remember the boundary. What do we need to do? Let's bring the ball back over here so we can stay away from it. So I'm telling him in a positive way and reinforcing what he needs to do by reminding him he's getting close and he still needs to remember that's a boundary and we stay well away from it. So we try and help with that. So if he does run into the game, if he cannot manage that boundary, then we have a natural consequence is the punishment. Rather than a punishment, it's a natural consequence of not being able to keep within the boundary. So if he can't stay on the right side of that game, if he runs into the game by mistake or intentionally, particularly intentionally, then we'll say, okay, Joel, you're not quite ready yet to manage this boundary. So perhaps we won't come with Nathan while he's playing his game until you have learned how to manage this boundary, because clearly you're not quite ready yet. And we need to wait a bit more until you are before we do this again. So that's a way to manage that. And that's a natural consequence. He doesn't get to come and play in the park while Nathan is playing football if he can't manage that boundary line. It's very important with children to differentiate between accidents, lack of skills or awareness, and intentional defiance and rebellion. So Joel could have accidentally gone over that line. So maybe his ball went where he hadn't expected it and it zooms into the football game and he just naturally will run after that. So that's like an accident, lack of skills or awareness. And that's very different to intentional defiance or rebellion. So we need to be aware of what the difference is. Now, I was quite a clumsy child. My mother, fortunately, understood the difference between an accident and an intentional break. As I grew older, they realized that I couldn't see very well, and that's why I was such a clumsy child. And my mum was always very careful. If it's an accident, it's an accident. You don't get punished for an accident. And I'm really, really grateful she had that approach to me as a clumsy child who broke a few things along the way. So the most important time to discipline a child is when they have intentionally and rebelliously crossed a boundary that you have set. And then we need to think, now what do we do? Now, when they have crossed the boundary and done something that you agreed was not to be done, then before you try to redirect them, you must connect with them. And this is really hard because you maybe feel really mad and cross and frustrated and angry or frightened. And quite often we're frightened and we yell because we're scared. We've gone into the distress cycle by what they've done. They've broken something important or expensive or whatever. And we go straight to that distress cycle. And then we might start yelling, and then the child finds it really, really difficult. So what we have to do, we can, is to pray and try and calm ourselves down. And remember that compassion cycle. You might have to say, we're just going to be quiet for a while, and when I calm down, then we will talk about this. But I want you to know that I love you and I care about you. So connect before you redirect. That's a really, really important principle when a child has done something that broke a boundary. Make sure they know, first of all, that you love them and you're there for them. And that develops that compassion cycle. I care about you. This went wrong. I still love you. I forgive you. And then let's think about what we're going to do next. Rules with that relationship will equal rebellion. So it's very important that they feel cared for before redirected. And respond to their emotions before responding to their behaviors. Calm their emotions down. They may be frightened, they may be distressed, they may be angry, they may be frustrated. So help them to calm before responding to the behaviors if you can. I know it's really hard because your emotions are all over the place at this time too. But the calmer that we can stay and be there for the child to help them manage themselves, then we can help them better. So if you can't manage this, maybe another parent can, or somebody else can say, and sometimes I've done this, okay, Bunny, I need to go and take a break. You need to relate to this child. This is what's happened. Stay with them, let them know they're loved, and then I'll come back and we'll sort it out. So we share that out sometimes. We have in the past, they're all in their 30s now. So if we have made a mistake or hurt our child in this process, we need to apologize to our child. This is not weakness. This is not bad parenting. This is good parenting. when we apologize to our children because we have yelled or we've done something wrong or we've been late for something, apologize, say sorry, and ask them to forgive you. Because when we do that, we teach them to apologize to us and ask for forgiveness. We teach them to apologize to God and ask for forgiveness. And if we're too proud to do it for our children, we interfere with the possibility of them learning from us how to apologize and ask for forgiveness. So effective discipline identifies which boundary was broken and why is it important to make sure it doesn't happen again. So maybe the boundary was in the back garden, we only play with soft balls, and they picked up a hard ball and they broke a window. And so which boundary was broken? It was the soft ball rule. Why is it important to make sure this doesn't happen again? Because the glass was broken and now people can get hurt by it, and it's going to cost to replace it, and it's going to take work. And this is why we have this rule. That needs to be explained when you make the rule in the first place, why we're doing this, because we don't want glass to break. Quickly show warmth, love, and acceptance. Don't contribute to their aloneness when they have broken the boundary. Because it's very frightening for a child if they feel they've behaved so badly that you're out of control and you might not love them anymore. We know that we're going to keep loving them. They don't know that, and that is really frightening. So in that moment of not being able to connect warmly with them when they've done something wrong, there is a fear of abandonment, rejection, all sorts of things that is very difficult for them to manage. And so be aware of that. Time in with children is much better than time out as a punishment. I used to think that time out was fine, but the more I've learned about how children's brains work, what I realize is that when children have misbehaved or they're struggling to manage their behavior, what they often need more than anything else is to be loved, to know that they are loved by us, and just to be held. I can see you're overwhelmed by your feelings right now. Let's just pause and just sit here and just cuddle quietly together until we're both calmer. And then when we're both calmer, let's do something together. I'll read you a story, or we'll do this, because often it's they're not sure, they're just missing our attention, and every child needs different amounts. So then somehow not feeling as safe and loved as we might like them to feel, that they struggle to manage their behavior. So time in says, I love you, I care for you, I support you in this time of difficult emotions. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to be here. And when we both calm down, then we'll do something nice together. My husband experienced time out as a child. He was the eldest of 5 children. And he did something, and what many parents did is he was just told, go into your room without any supper. He was so distressed at 9 years old when he was sent to his room and he had time out and no one was connecting with him, that he seriously thought about committing suicide. And we need to realize we don't always know what's going through children's minds in that time. And their time in with us helps them to feel safe and loved, and that life will go on. Without that time in, they can feel, will we reject them? What will we do to them? It's a time of fear. And so time in is that perfect love that casts out the fear, that helps them to calm down well and to manage their difficult emotions. So effective discipline means that we need to pray for wisdom to respond well, because it's complex. And we have our own issues that we're dealing with, our own fatigue, our ups and downs of hormones, our sleep deprivation, and other things that are going on in our life, which makes it harder for us to fully focus on what our children might be needing, and they depend on us to manage that for them. So we need to find a good time to talk calmly and privately if something went wrong. Don't talk about it. Don't discipline one child in front of the others. That is shaming them. It's really difficult for them. It can set up bullying and jealousy and all sorts of things. So talk privately and calmly. And don't say, why did you do that? They don't know. It's complex. So don't ask why. Say, what happened? What happened? Tell me what happened here, like I did to Nathan. Tell me what went on here, what happened. And just say it in a neutral way like that. Because if we ask them to tell us why, they can't. They will make something up. It's just not useful. Natural and logical consequences are that the discipline is linked to the wrongdoing, the broken boundary. Like, if you're going to run into the football, game and you can't manage that boundary, then we don't come to the park when Nathan plays football. If you take a cookie before dinner, you don't get one after dinner, and maybe you don't get one for the next few days either. So make the discipline linked to the wrongdoing, not just a physical punishment or taking something away. They now say, don't take away a child's device. Much as we would like to, taking away a child's device is kind of like it is a bond for them, and we break that bond. Much as we would like to do it, sometimes it's actually not helpful for the child. So find other ways to manage devices with special timing systems and other boundaries that you can do to set limits on device usage. Ask older children what would be a logical discipline for their misbehavior. So we did this when we had teenagers. We said, okay, guys, we're parents of teenagers. What kind of rules do we need to have in this household to keep everybody safe and loved? And our teenagers came up with some rules for that. So we let them help us make the rules. So if we were the kids and you were the parents, what rules would you set for us if we were teenagers? They were really good. They made some really good rules. And one of them was we shouldn't be out after 10 o'clock unless you've had special permission. So one day, one of them stayed out after 10 o'clock without special permission, came back home, and the other two children were like, hey, you stayed out after 10 o'clock without special permission, you broke a boundary. And so, and they actually asked the child, the teenager who broke the boundary, what do you think should be your punishment, the logical, the logical consequences for you staying out? And so he said, well, I think, it was really bad. I broke this rule. I'm sorry. I think that I should be grounded for 2 weeks. And so as parents, we said, whoa, that's a bit harsh. Why don't just be grounded for 1 week? 1 week will do it. And they're like, oh, mum and dad, you're so generous. And this actually helped us manage our children's behavior in quite an interesting, creative way. It actually worked quite well. We also, if they did something, they had to put things right. They had to help pay for things they broke, and do something nice for people they've hurt. And I've learned about this since my children grew up. But in some families, if one child hurts, annoys, or whatever another child, then the logical consequence for that is they have to do something nice for someone that they've hurt. So they say, what can I do for you that will be nice? So rather than just forcing them to say sorry when they're not really sorry, we say the desired behavior is kindness. So that's what we'd like you to do to put this right so that you learn to be kind. So that's quite a creative way of dealing with some situations. And catch them doing something right. Philippians 4:8 says, whatever's lovely, pure, true, etc., focus on these things. And this is a really positive thing for children. Give special attention to them when they are behaving well. Because we often ignore them when they behave well. Yay, they're playing happily. I'll just go into another room and make the dinner. But tell them they made a good choice. Tell them that was great. Tell them you noticed. Thank them. Because that gratitude, that thankfulness, that positive comment will give them joy for a long time. And Ellen White says this too. So you might say, you played happily with your brother for 10 minutes. Go and choose a book and I'll read it to you. And notice their character strengths and tell them when they made a good choice. So that's a whole other seminar that I do, is how to develop character in children. And character is developed when we know the character strengths. There's like 24 main ones. And we tell our child, you were courageous today, you were persevering, you were patient, you were kind, you were generous. We tell them that when you did this, that was a really good choice. I was really proud of you. And that builds their character and their good behavior far more powerfully by saying, I saw you do that, that was amazing. Or let's see if we can practice patience together. Let's do this fun thing where we can practice patience together. And then you give them, an affirmation for being patient for 5 minutes, if that's a good long time for them. And so if you want to learn more about character, I do have a seminar online called Nurturing Characters for Eternity, which goes more into this, or I can come back and do the seminar for you another time. But we do far more benefit as parents by noticing what they do well, than telling them what they're doing wrong. You feel more motivated and inspired if your boss says, hey, that was really great. You think, oh yeah, I'll do more of that. If they come and tell you what you've done wrong, you feel discouraged. So when your children go to bed at night and you tuck them up, ask them things like, what did they learn about God's love today? What do they want to thank God for? What did they do well today? And notice yourself as a parent. What did you do well today? List at least 3 things that you did well, because it can be tough being a parent and you can feel like you're not doing stuff well, but you are amazing. When some parents come to me and they say, oh, I'm a lousy parent, I don't do anything well, I'll say, well, are your children still alive today? Yes, they're alive. And they usually laugh. I say, well, I know, I've had 3 kids. One of them broke 15 bones before he left home. I know how hard it can be to keep a child safe and alive. Well done. Did you feed them? Yes, I fed them. Well done. That's amazing. And where are they now? They're in bed asleep. Look, I know as a parent how hard just getting everyone through the day is. Give yourself a pat on the back. So look at what you're doing well as a parent and tell your child 3 things they did well every day as you tuck them up into bed, because then they go to bed with a lovely feeling in their mind. Even if things went a bit wobbly, at the end of the day, they will remember, Mummy or Daddy said, I did this and I did this and I did this, and they were so proud of me. And tell them, that God loves them as well. And because when they go to bed feeling loved, feeling grateful to God, feeling that they did something well, they'll go to sleep more peacefully. We now know that when we go to bed feeling peaceful and positive about our lives, the sleep is better quality and it actually protects against anxiety and depression in us as parents and also issues in our children. So it will damage their happiness. So the more happier they are, the easier it is for them to behave well, as we learnt. So if they go to bed happier, they will tend to wake happier, and that will get the next day started well as well. So this is a very lightning tour of discipline. These are things I've learned now. Some of them I knew before I had kids. Others I've learned along the way from my children, my experience, my reading as a therapist and as a psychologist. I did my psychology training at Andrews University in a Christian context, and that was really brilliant. And now as we close, I want to pray this prayer for you. And if you want to close your eyes while I bless you, you may, or you may want to read the words on the screen as I would do. And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight. And that's what you're doing here tonight. So that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. So this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight as a parent, so you can discern what is best and lovingly discipline your children and grow their characters to be more like Jesus. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you very much, Karen. That was beautiful.